The latter day Godfather. Oh, it was yes, it was people thinking that, I'm going to hate on it because it's, a Dana White thing, but I 100% understand why he would want to do it. Anyone would want to do this. It's just the timing of we don't do gimmick fights and this coming 2 weeks later is a little funky. But I think he is so in his world at this point, like his own world, that he doesn't even like make the connection. And there's no one there to tell him like, hey, it's a little hypocritical to say this about a Francis and Anthony Joshua fights. And then I see the quotes about him saying like, no. What I meant when I said gimmick fight was MMA fighters going over to boxing. And all right, fine. Even though, like, I mean, this is obviously way more of a gimmick fight than an MMA fighter boxing. Like, what are we talking about here? This is crazy stuff. Anyway, I feel like I'm going in circles here, and this is all lunacy. The latter-day Godfather. Salut, mon ami Ariel. Salut. Ilia Topuria's win on Saturday increased him to 14-0. Is he the best undefeated fighter currently in the UFC? Other options could include Movsar Evloev, Mohamed Mokaev. Would love to hear your thoughts and the boys' thoughts on this. Best from Portland, Oregon. Well, of those three, I would say he is further along, yes. Is there another undefeated fighter that I'm missing? Oh, Khamzat Chimaev. Yeah, Khamzat. Yeah. They just came, yeah. I would put Khamzat above most people, even, regular fighters who aren't undefeated. But he's up there. He's 100% up there. He is a very impressive fighter. And if you look at the featherweight rankings, there's some names who he hasn't fought. I would love to see him against an Arnold Allen. I would love to see him against a Brian Ortega. I would love to see him against a Max Holloway, even a Yair if Yair loses. But he is also potentially going to benefit from the fact that Alex has beaten a lot of these guys and always needs fresh blood. So he may get a title shot sooner rather than later, just on that fact alone. Hut, Ariel, you have mentioned that Conor has 2 fights left on his UFC contract. Do you think this has anything to do with why he hasn't been able to get a fight signed? Perhaps UFC want him to agree to at least one additional fight so he ultimately cannot back them into a corner. Great job, everyone. Love the show. It's not a bad shout. It's not a bad theory, but that's really not what is holding up the fight right now. I think they would love to get that one fight in and then deal with the rest. And Conor has shown no signs of truly going out on his own. I think he's actually very happy in the UFC and gets paid pretty well. I would still argue that he's probably underpaid, but that is not what is holding this up. Even though it's a solid theory, it would come into play a little bit more with one fight left, like we saw with Nate over the past year. Michael Alexander Friedman writes, "Hey Ariel, huge fan. I know it's still a while away, but who would your opinion make the best fight to headline UFC 300? McGregor, Chandler, possibly. I mean, the longer this goes, very good chance of that. Musk Zuck, don't laugh, but I wouldn't be surprised if they are sitting around and saying that could be a thing. And I do feel like it's like a little bit like you got to look at the biggest names. Izzy would make sense. Obviously, if he's fighting in September, a return in the spring makes sense. John Jones fighting in November, if he has one other fight, that would make sense. I would think Leon's going to fight before then. If Sean wins, if O'Malley wins, but it really depends on who hasn't fought, and it's still like 7-8 months away, so it's hard to predict, to be honest. Like, we don't even know who's fighting in September. Taco Enthusiast makes sense. To do. Oh, okay. So yeah. My question is about the PFL's decision to nullify a fight between Natan Shelty and Hausch Manfio for not, quote, putting forward the best efforts to win the fight and subsequently give Shane Burgos the final playoff spot. While I want to hear your general thoughts on this, I also want to know if you feel like these types of fights are inevitable in the PFL model. In the UFC, they've got Merab and Aljo, and that fight could be avoided forever in theory, but in a PFL playoff format, they'd probably have to fight at some point, right? Is this good or bad? Well, the problem with this one is it happened in the regular season, not the playoffs. And I wonder, what would happen if they met in the finals? Would they do this sort of thing? I think ultimately a true, honest conversation needed to happen before this fight. And if they spoke to the guys and said, look, you're scheduled to fight each other just based on, the seedings and who the fuck knows how they do this thing. But If they had this honest conversation and they said that, no, we're going to fight, don't worry about it, then it's on the fighters. If they had the honest conversation and said, no, we're not going to fight, and they still booked it, it's on the promotion. If they didn't have the conversation, I would still say it's on the promotion, but also the fighters probably should have spoke up. Ultimately, I don't love the fact that the corners didn't speak and that it just felt like from the get-go, the fighters weren't going to engage. But as I said on Monday, like I see a lot of people saying, if this was the UFC, I'd be killing them. Yeah, I mean, I think the fighters are owed some of the blame here. They deserve some of the blame for not engaging. I do think the promotion deserves some of the blame as well for the decision. Ultimately, Natan won. I think he should proceed. If they determine that he did not throw the fight, that there was no fight fixing going on, and by virtue of the fact that they paid them, their full purse, it seems like they're determining that. And by virtue of the fact that the Georgia Commission felt the same and did not impose any sanctions, Natan should move on. This should be a learning lesson for them, just like all the failed drug tests were. And they should figure this out for next season. And maybe you don't put two friends in the same, or training partners in the same division, bracket, whatever you want to call it, and move on. But to rob Natan of that doesn't sit very well.